Okay, we're going to get started. Today we're going to talk about, excuse me, part one of Chatichah Neveilah ChaNaN. It's in Tzadi Beis, if Gimel Dal. And we'll start as follows. There's a principle of time kicker, which tells us that if you have for example, if you had a piece of chazer would fall into a kosher stew, then the whole thing is usher. Okay, but even though the whole stew is usher, with the piece of pork floating around in it, the whole stew is not considered to be chazer itself. And like for example, if you had a kazayis of that stew, you would not be getting malchus for that. But basar b'chalav is different than that. And basar b'chalav, if I have the only issur starts when I have basar and chalav mixed together. So when I mix them, if I take basar and chalav and I cook them together, and then I eat that, then I get, for kazayis of that, I get malchus for that, even though it's only some basar and some chalav, not a kazayis of either, but that's okay. The issur is when we mix them together. Okay, so that's in the dinam of time kicker, that basar b'chalav is obviously different than other issurim, that the basar and chalav together is what makes the issur. Okay, that comes out in our din, what we're talking about, which is ChaNaN, and it says that what happens if we have, but when we mix basar b'chalav together, mix milk and meat, cook milk and meat together, they are considered to be complete issur. What we've made is issur. And we now, if you want to be mevatel that, we have to mevatel the whole thing. So what do I mean? We have basar and chalav mixed together. An ounce of basar and an ounce of chalav, and it falls into 60 ounces worth of something else. Okay, so now the chalav is batal. The chalav is batal b'shishim. So the basar would also be batal b'shishim. But the basar b'chalav is 2 ounces, so it's not batal b'shishim. Okay, the whole thing is issur. It's not only milk that's usher or meat that's usher. It's the thing together is now it's 2 ounces worth of issur, so it needs to be batal b'shishim.
That's obvious, because then what else would be the issur?
No, what I mean is, as opposed to had a piece of chazer fallen into issur,
right.
An ounce of chazer and an ounce of heter, and they fell them together, then it's only an ounce of chazer in here. Over here, the 2 ounces together, the basar b'chalav is the issur together, and therefore, even though we were mevatel one of them, that wouldn't make a difference. Okay, we have to mevatel them together. That's Chatichah and Neveilah. Chatichah.
Separately.
What do you say? Let's say had you put milk into water first, and it was batal b'shishim, then milk would fall, then meat would fall into it. It would not be usher. Right, it would not be usher. Okay, so that's ChaNaN for basar b'chalav. That's where this traditional ChaNaN is in basar b'chalav. Okay, so midraisa, that's the only case where because in basar b'chalav the basar and the chalav are each heter, and together they become issur. Okay, so some Rishonim say that in order to avoid confusion from the fact that when we did say ChaNaN and when we don't say ChaNaN, so therefore Chazal said that ChaNaN should apply also to other issurim as well, not just for basar b'chalav, but for all issurim, all of issurim. So for example, if we make a clam beverage, and that beverage is 10% clam and 90% heter, okay? This beverage is only 10% clam. And now that clam beverage is put in 15% that clam beverage is now 15% of a beer formula, okay? So now the amount of clam in the beer would be batal b'shishim. The amount of clam that's in there is enough to be batal b'shishim. Okay, because it's only the beverage is only 15% of the beer, and the beverage itself is only 10% clam in the first place. Okay, but if we say ChaNaN, then we look at the clam beverage as being 100% issur, and now 100% issur is not batal into the beer because it's 15% of the beer. The beer is not batal. We say ChaNaN, it would not be batal. Okay, so that's called ChaNaN b'shar issurim. I mean, basar b'chalav is the real case when midraisa is ChaNaN, and some Rishonim say that midrabanan this is ChaNaN by other issurim, but not basar b'chalav. Okay, so that's what some Rishonim say. The Mechaber follows the sheet of most Rishonim, who say that there is no ChaNaN b'shar issurim, and ChaNaN it's only ChaNaN by basar b'chalav. Okay, I'll get to Ramah in 1 second. So I'll tell you the Ramah. But the Ramah says that the minig is to be machmer. The minig is to be machmer and say that you should say ChaNaN b'shar issurim, except we'll see in a second in case of Hefsed merubah. So that bear in mind, just the Ramah himself in Teres Chatas, okay, the Ramah says, even the Ramah is masking, Broi Poskim say you don't say ChaNaN, you only say ChaNaN b'basar b'chalav. Okay, most Rishonim hold that it's not that there is no ChaNaN b'shar issurim. Even so, he says you should be machmer. We're machmer for ChaNaN, but we'll see that there's lots of kulas so that because we'll only be machmer, only be machmir for these shitas. The Rama says that the makom hefsed merubah you could be samach. Okay, so now before I tell you what that means hefsed merubah, I'll give an example that happened here. An example to spring out a little bit of a question, which is the Machaber says we only say ChaNaN by Basar b'chalav. So there's one pretty well-known shaila is what happens if I have Basar b'chalav that falls into something else? It was skip that. Okay. We had a situation where a company was making marshmallow treats. Okay, marshmallow treats is Rice Krispies made with marshmallows. Okay, like held together, glued together by a mix of marshmallow and things like that. Okay, the company was making a treif. Okay, so that means that they were using real marshmallows, and the marshmallows were made with beef gelatin. So that means is these marshmallows were treif because they and the Rice Krispie treats were treif as well. This company also had butter in their recipe. So now the question is that was part of the recipe? Are these Rice Krispie treats? Now the shilas about this thing, is this ChaNaN of Basar b'chalav or is this ChaNaN of Sha'ar issurim? What's the question? It's Basar b'chalav, right? It's animal gelatin and butter. Okay, it's Basar b'chalav. But over here, the animal gelatin is also in Neveilah. It's not kosher animal gelatin. It's treif animal gelatin. So
you're saying it's not, and you don't need a treif species. You're saying it's a Kashrus.
It's in Neveilah. It's in Neveilah.
Right,
it's in Neveilah. So the I'm sorry, I should be clear. It's Neveilah. So that's a shayla nachronim is the Mechaber is machmir for ChaNaN by Basar, says this ChaNaN by Basar b'chalav. But that's because Basar b'chalav, both sides are heter before you started. But over here, it was not heter before you started. Here, the Basar side of it was not heter. The Basar was Neveilah. Okay, there's a shayla in 1,000 shach talk about it. Where the Basar was Neveilah also. So if the Basar was Neveilah, it wasn't heter and heter coming together to make a new issur. It's issur and heter coming together.
Actually, different. Still Basar b'chalav.
But if you only say ChaNaN when the Chatichah became a Neveilah,
because that shows you what you're issuring. Obviously, what you're issuring is the thing. But the Maisa, you see the Basar b'chalav.
Okay.
I mean, I was saying that's a straightforward shot.
okay, it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes. So in that case, it's considered. But
So then what's usher? So they're not saying this Basar b'chalav doesn't apply.
no, it's Basar b'chalav.
Say Basar b'chalav.
No, because of it's ChaNaN.
So okay, so let's say not ChaNaN. So then what's usher?
What do you mean? So what's also?
What becomes issur Basar b'chalav? I got butter and I got Neveilah.
Correct.
You say Basar b'chalav applies here. So what's usher in the issur Basar b'chalav? What is it? Well, on what is the issur Basar b'chalav chal?
On both of them, on the Basar b'chalav.
Hey,
oh, yes, that's there. Okay, I don't remember. Okay, so now, so the Rama says that we say, excuse me, the Rama says that the makam hefsed merubah will make and we don't say ChaNaN b'Sha'ar issurim. Okay, so two examples of us saying that we're not going to be machmir b'Sha'ar issurim. The makom hefsed merubah. Two examples of hefsed merubah one was Rebelsky said that any time a company mislabeled something, okay, they put a symbol onto it that said that the thing is kosher, and it really wasn't. And so now you have to think about is, should the company do a recall on that product? They put the symbol on it that says that's kosher, but really was not kosher. So now, if it was treif, then obviously you have to do a recall. People are eating treif food. If it's kosher, then there's more room to say is, well, maybe we don't have to do a recall because really it's kosher anyhow. So now it's just a question of they did the wrong thing, but people aren't eating treif because of that. So he said, if the only reason why it's treif is because of ChaNaN, okay, you'll think of a situation, and the thing would be kosher if not for the fact that it's ChaNaN. He said, forcing them to do a recall is considered a hefsed merubah. Okay? Making the company do a recall is a hefsed merubah. So if the only reason to make this food treif is because of ChaNaN, then you say ChaNaN, but not hefsed merubah, we don't have to be kosher to ChaNaN.
The hefsed merubah is it's like in many ways.
That's a separate question. Why that applies to yes, it's correct. It's the same thing. Oh, that's a separate question. But yes, it's true. But in the concept was forcing them to do recall is considered hefsed merubah, and therefore we would not say ChaNaN b'Sha'ar issurim in that kind of way.
Even if it's hidden, you can ask, why do you have some merubah allow me to be? Why should I eat it? But you have it stuck. Does it save you from a hefsed merubah?
Okay, that I'm not sure it's such a kasha. Okay, I'm not sure if that one's such a question. Okay. Another example. Hold on a second. Oops. Hold on a second, please. I'm sorry. Okay. Another example of hefsed merubah was if you have a medicine, if it's a question on a medicine, so we're talking about for a chayla, so then we would not, that's equivalent to a hefsed merubah. So what's the example of that? You have a medicine, a liquid medicine, and it's 25% of the medicine is glycerin. Okay, and the glycerin, you don't know, it might be animal-based. Okay, well, if it's animal-based, then 25% is not going to be Bitul. So there, Rebelsky said also, he says, if you take the medicine and you dilute it in water or juice or something like that, and you dilute it in every teaspoon in 3 ounces, so if you do the math, you'll find out that there are 6 teaspoons in an ounce. So if we think that of the whole liquid medicine as being issur, it's only 6 times as much. That's not enough to be Bitul. But if we say, wait a second, it's only 25% glycerin, the rest of it is kosher ingredients. So then it would have been Bitul 72 times. Okay, you believe me, Bitul 72 times. And therefore he said, so then to say, if we say ChaNaN, you have to put it in so much more that it's not realistic that your 2-year-old who's screaming and sick is going to drink, a whole bottle of this stuff. Right? So he said that's also considered hefsed merubah, and you could be samach that you could be samach. You don't have to be choshech for ChaNaN, and therefore you could be mevatel just in 3 ounces instead of being mevatel in however many more times you would have needed in it. Okay. Now there are other studies to be made also, but just
hefsed merubah has anything to do with it.
The treating a chayla is the equivalent of a case of hefsed merubah. Just like the hefsed merubah we wouldn't be choshech, so too this is equivalent to that, and we also wouldn't be choshech. Okay. So Tosfos says that the typical case, the typical case where Tosfos talks about whether you say ChaNaN is when you want to kasher something, which means is if you have a kli, we assume this part's not there, but we assume that the contents of a kli is 30 times as much as the volume of the metal of the kli. He says, so if you kasher a kli, the bli that comes out is going to make the water treif and make the kli treif again. So Tosfos says if you don't have to worry about ChaNaN, then you can kasher a kli twice, and that's good enough. Why? Because the first time you kasher it, the bli comes out. The bli is Bitul, we'll say, in 30 times. So now the water that's in the kli that you just kasher is now 1/30th treif. Okay, so it gets reabsorbed. So now the absorption is 1/30th treif. Pour out the water, put in fresh water, and the next time is now Bitul in 900. Because now 1/30th and another 30 times is in 900. So, so even just 8 times it would have been up. 8 and 8 would have been 64. So that's, if you're choshech for ChaNaN, that doesn't work. Because the water is not a 30th treif, the water is 100% treif. And if you're not choshech for ChaNaN, then you're okay. Okay? For us, that's one example, which comes up on occasion. A person would want to kasher something twice as a way of avoiding ein binyamin. But in other cases, like this. If you make, in a canning facility, sometimes the only thing that's treif there is pork and beans. Okay? That sounds pretty awful, right? Pork and beans, right? But pork and beans is the pork part. Right, pork and beans usually is completely kosher, except for 1 piece of pork in every can. Okay, that's like a thing. There's 1 piece in every can. 1 piece of pork in the can. And let's how much is the pork in the can? Is it 10%? What percent of the can is the pork? Only a small amount. Or another example, this is a Yossi example, is we have a company that make cheese, and they cook their mozzarella cheese, and they make end up with something called cooked water, and it's treif the cooked water, and that cooked water gets mixed in with the rest of their waste stream, and now it's 5% of the waste stream in the factory. Okay, so and now someone went ahead and spray dried the whey cream or something like the whey from the waste stream. They concentrated it and they dried it. Okay, so now if we say ChaNaN, then the thing we're talking about, the can of pork and beans, or the water, or the waste stream, is 100% treif. Okay, it's 100% treif. If we say it's only a 5 or 10% treif, then we have another cheshbon. Okay, and that's why I'm throwing this in. There's something called issur shamish b'shefa. If a kli only has a 5% bli of treif, any use that you can use for that kli afterwards, any bli will come out of it, will be bought the b'shishim into the thing you're going to make afterwards. Okay, so then that's a very yeshayel. The Mechaber says if something's issur shamish b'shefa, you don't have to kasher it altogether. Okay, we don't always do that, but there's what to think about. But when this ChaNaN says no, that can of pork and beans is 100% treif. It's not 10% or 7% treif. It's 100% treif. So then the bli is 100%, not 10%. Okay, so that's another case where ChaNaN would come into kashering situation. Okay, now I told you that the Ramah says is machmir for ChaNaN, except in certain cases. So I'm going to break that down. What I'm about to say is the way that, as I understand it, the way the Pri Chodesh breaks it down like this. He says like this. No, sorry, that didn't work. Try it, sorry. Okay, so the first case is, The case that the Rama is talking about that says that there is ChaNaN is Lach yavesh. What does it mean, Lach yavesh? So the simplest case for us of Lach yavesh is you have Bli in the Kli. Rav Moshe brings from Mashach. The Bli is considered as Lach, which makes sense to us. So we have Bli in the Kli, and on the belt that's treif, someone put cookies onto there. Okay, the company is baking cookies. Those cookies are considered to be our Lach, the Bli that's coming out of Lach, into a solid piece, into the cookies that are running on there. That's the case where we would say ChaNaN. Okay. Then the Rama says, but if it's Lach balach, then we only have to be choshesh. We are choshesh for ChaNaN also, unless it's a Hefsed merubah. Okay. The first case, where it's Lach yavesh, we just flat out say that there's ChaNaN. But in the case where it's Lach balach, then we say ChaNaN also. But the makom Hefsed merubah, then we're meko, which is most cases for us end up being cases of Lach balach, but not always. And then the last case Rama says is, what happens is yavesh yavesh. He says, if it's yavesh yavesh, then there's no ChaNaN at all. Okay?
Does anybody say ChaNaN by yavesh yavesh?
What do you say?
Does anybody say ChaNaN by yavesh yavesh?
Yes, some do, but the Rama says we're not choshesh.
How does that time get into the...
Okay, so that's correct. But the question, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why some. But the Rama says we're not machmir for it at all. Completely. At the end of the Rama, it's way back a few screens ago. We're not machmir for it at all. So in case of yavesh, in the case of yavesh, now in the case of yavesh, there's a detail here. Okay, what you said, Yochanan, is the way Rebelsky explained it. I'm not sure if everyone said it that way, which is that the point of yavesh is there's no transfer of time from one to the other. Okay, they're just pieces. They're chatichas. Okay, in the case of Lach balach, there's no chatichah. That's why there's possibly no ChaNaN, because there's no chatichah nasas Neveilah. The yavesh there are chatichas, but no time transfer to each other. So l'inyan, what happens if you have powders mixed together, like a stabilizer blend? Also, a stabilizer blend, okay, that you can use to make yogurt. So it's powders mixed together, and the stabilizer blend has gelatin in it, okay, and it's mixed with all kinds of other stuff in it. That's all kosher, okay. So do we say ChaNaN on that or not? So now, in other halachas, in other types of halachas, a mix of powders is considered to be Lach balach. Okay, the powders, because the definition for most rules, what's Lach and yavesh has to do with, is it distinct? Okay, can I pick one piece out from the other? So powders are not. Powders are most assumed that powders are Lach balach, because you can't pick out one piece of powder from the other piece. It's just one. It's a jumble. It's all together. It's as if liquid.
Anytime you have yavesh, if chatichas get to a certain size, very small, also you will have the same problem. I mean, it's very hard.
When chatichas speak, right? So when they come up to be like a powder,
it's hard to put a specific to define exactly when it becomes a powder, and it'd be harder to distinguish.
That's wonderful. That's true. So we can think about that when we get to that kind of situation. But when we have a powder, when it looks at us, we know we're looking at it, right? When we're looking at cookies, we know those are yavesh. When we look at powders, we know that. What's the exact line? We'll think about a different thing. But in the case of a powder, in his stabilizer blend, where it's a powder, so for other halachas, that's considered Lach balach. But for this halacha, it's not considered Lach balach, because for our purposes, what we care about is any time transferring from one to the other one. It's not. It's just a mix of powders. Okay? In which case, so therefore he said is, for the case of in the powder stabilizer blend, we'll see later, next time, other reasons to not say ChaNaN in that case. You also wouldn't say ChaNaN, which has to do with the yogurt that's made out of that blend. Okay, so the gelatin is not bottled in the blend, and then the blend is not bottled into the yogurt, but if we don't say ChaNaN, then the gelatin is bottled. Okay. We now move to a different kind of question, okay, and that is like this. Prima Government says that since ChaNaN B'Sha'ar issurim is only drabanan, I've said that a dozen times, it's only a drabanan. He says, so we could say Safek drabanan l'kula. Okay, we say Safek drabanan l'hakol. So, for example, if we had an ounce of issur fell into 10 ounces of heter, okay, so it's treif. And now that 10 ounces fell into a big vat full of other things. And the big vat, there was for sure 60 ounces in that vat, but we don't know if there was 660 ounces. Okay, we know there was enough to be mevatel the original Neveilah in 10 times. But we don't know if there was enough to be mevatel the 10 ounces, the 11 ounces in Shisha. Okay? So in that case, people say, so therefore in that case, you say Safek drabanan l'kula, and don't be choshesh for ChaNaN. So without ChaNaN, it would be Bitul b'shishim, because the Neveilah is for sure Bitul b'shishim. But we don't know if the whole ChaNaN was Bitul b'shishim, so it's too late, it's spilled out, we can't tell anymore, so we say Safek and you don't have to be Kashrus for ChaNaN in that case. Okay? You're allowed to eat whatever's left in the pot. This big vat has now 500 left. Was there 660? Was it not 660? So we say, it's okay, it's mutter, because maybe there was Safek and you could eat. Okay? That's the case Prima Gon says you could be mechel. That's a simple case. But the case that's more to us, or the more complicated case, is what happens if it's a different kind of Safek? Not a Safek that it got mixed in and we don't know if there was shisha or not. But what happens if there's a machlokes haposkim? And in the machlokes haposkim, we usually would be machmir on that shayla because Safek deraisa l'chumra. It's a shayla of a deraisa, so we're machmir on the shayla. Okay, we take a strict position on something. But now it bangs into a situation of ChaNaN. Okay, now it bangs into a situation of ChaNaN. So should we say, well, we're machmir about the shayla, usually we're machmir about the shayla. And now it banged into ChaNaN, which is a drabanan principle, to be different. It's a shayla of a deraisa, we're machmir on that shayla. Open up the Shulchan, it says to be machmir on that shayla. So now that it's ChaNaN, we should still be machmir. Or should we say that, wait a second, we were only machmir originally because it was a shayla of a deraisa. Now that it's only at most a shayla of the rabbanon, because now it's just ChaNaN, so now we could be mekel. Okay?
That would be an example of that.
So to you, I'm about to say, it sounds like, oh my gosh, that's like a real theoretical question. Like, who cares? I mean, it sounds like someone's just sitting at night, But for us, it's super negay, okay? And negay is the steam systems, okay? Which is, when you cook food in a kettle and it's being heated by steam, we say that we assume that tam goes through the walls of the kli and makes the condensate, the steam on the other side, makes a treif. Okay, and time goes back and forth between those. Okay, but we'll see, maybe even in a few times from now, when we get to there, that there's actually a machlokes rishonim, whether time or not whether and how much time passes through a kli. So this that we're assuming, and you open up a Shulchan Aruch in Halacha, we're in Tzadi Basar. We open up the Halacha, it says that time goes through a kli, and we assume it goes all the way through and completely through. That's not muskim. That's not for sure. That's the way we practice. But it's a real machlokes about that. So we say, Safek deraisa l'chumra. It might be making your food treif, so therefore the food might be treif, so you have to be machmir about that. So what would you say, what happens now if it's a shayla only of ChaNaN? Would we be machmir on that shayla also if it's a shayla of ChaNaN? So two ways that it comes.
And how would the ChaNaN would be the question if the steam...
I'm going to tell you, two ways that it can happen. One is, we made the steam treif. Okay, they were making something treif in here, and the steam is treif. And now we've been flushing the water out. Okay, we've gotten out 70% of the water is out, and 30% of the water is still left behind. We haven't gotten rid of all the treif water yet. It takes time to get rid of the treif water. So we've gotten rid of most of the treif water, but we still have some left behind of treif water. So is the steam system now 100% treif, or is the steam system only 30% treif? Okay, meaning, should we say ChaNaN or not? We know there's 30% of the water floating in the steam system. 30% is still left behind from the original treif water. So is the steam system now 100% treif, or is the steam system only 30% treif? Okay, or another case, what happens if the food that we cook in these pots that we were cooking here itself wasn't 100% treif? The food we were cooking was only 5% treif. So if the food is only 5% treif, then should we say that the steam is now 100% treif? Because we said ChaNaN on what they cooked. So 5% treif made the food actually 100% treif, and now it passes through and makes the steam treif also. Or should we say is, no, the food is only 5% treif, but that ChaNaN is only 5% treif. So the water on the other side of the steam system is also only 5% treif.
This is Lach, right?
Yes, so Lach is very relevant over here. But so should ChaNaN tell us that this that we usually machmir to say that time transfers through, that chumra that we have, which will be machmir because of Safek deraisa, that chumra that we have to follow that chita, should we be machmir that when the question we face is only ChaNaN? Now, I have to tell you, I'm going to pause for a second just to tell you that the case I keep telling you is that we cook Neveilah, which happens. It's not such a common thing to happen in a company that they're cooking Neveilah, that we have to worry about a steam system. Usually what we worry about are things like milk, or chol vacuum, or gvinas akum. Those are the kinds of things that tend to be more likely in a plant. We're going to see next time, there might be reasons to not say ChaNaN on those b'chlal. Okay, to not worry about ChaNaN for those kind of issurim. So the example I'm using is Neveilah, because on Neveilah, those coolers are not going to apply. Okay? Anyhow. What?
Gelatin is not that uncommon.
Right, so gelatin is also right. So gelatin also. So gelatin could be Bitul. It has to be enough to be not both the b'shishim also. Okay, so but yes, joking could be awesome. Okay, so now you're gonna sort of have to believe me on this one. Okay, I'm not giving you this goes on for a whole page here, which I'm not going to tell you, and that is. What? Yes. Okay. Good. Ready to back. Okay. I don't have to say everything on live camera, Okay, but yes. Okay. So you're going to have to believe me that on this shiloh, should we say Safek Rabbanon L'Kula for these kind of cases when ChaNaN bangs into should we say ChaNaN by case like that? You're going to have to believe me if you want. After I can give you the whole thing to read. I see 5 shittas about this. Okay. You for now you have to believe me. Okay, there's 5 shittas. Some say like this. You could be Meko ChaNaN if there are still people in Lamaisa who follow the Kula B'Kashita. Okay, they're talking about a chaylev de b'nei reinus. Okay, it's a certain chaylev that some people eat and some people don't eat. And the shiloh should we say ChaNaN on that chaylev that some people eat this fat and some people don't eat the fat. That the din is we don't eat it. We are machmir on that shiloh because they suffer l'chomer. It might be chaylev de raisa. We're machmir about that, but some people do eat it. So if some people are being meko, then that's good enough to say that we don't say ChaNaN in the case. Okay, that's what one sheet. That's one version of what the Marshal says. Okay, another version of the Marshal says is that. No, we'll make them no matter what. Make them this. If the whole reason to be machmer originally was just we'd be machmer for a shayla with the raisa, then when it only comes to ChaNaN, then you could be made. Okay, there's another version of the Marshal. Okay, a third one.
Is this only Lach b'Lach, Lach or even Lach yavesh?
I think only by Lach b'Lach. I don't remember. I'll have to look back at my notes. What? No, the question is, should we be by Lach yavesh? Then we would not be meko. But we would not be meko. Right, correct.
Why should we Lach b'Lach?
You missed. It was a few minutes ago. Okay,
He says, if the issur is told Machlokes, if it's sirif that ChaNaN is a shayla, you can be meko. That's the topic.
No. So the point is that since ChaNaN is a drabanan, so we were originally machmer, let's say, about chaylev de b'nei reinus. We're machmer about that only because it's a shayla deraisa, but now it's only a shayla drabanan. Okay.
Drabanan is Machlokes.
Okay. So now another. This is the way the Taz says it. Is that we'll be machmer. We're machmer for ChaNaN unless it comes out to it. It's very interesting. He says it. The sheet of the. If I remember, it's about the chaylev b'nei reinus and ChaNaN are both Rabbeinu Ephraim in both of them. So he said we can't be machmer for we would be machmer for ChaNaN except if it's the same person who was machmer on one thing and making on the other one. Then it does make sense to be machmer for that. I'm not sure why that makes so much sense. Why? I mean, it's not like we're asking him the shayla, But if it's the same person, then we wouldn't have been machmer. Okay, that's a third sheet. That's a Taz. Krieger says it depends on whether the shayla comes up together. Okay, if the two shaylas come together, then we say it's a shayla, it's a ChaNaN, and this other shayla, then we're coming together. But if one was decided already, like the chaylev b'nei reinus, we decided it's us already, then we can't then say, but now be make that ChaNaN afterwards. Okay, and I'm doing this real quickly. And the last one is from the Pri Megadim, who says in almost every case it's a Safek, and if it's a Safek, then you could be make that ChaNaN. So l'inyanenu, okay, this is what I want to show you afterwards. L'inyanenu for a steam system, if you follow along what we're saying. We would be machmir for ChaNaN according to 3 of those shittas. According to 3 of those ways of looking at it, we would have to say ChaNaN. Meaning, does anyone follow the Mekillah? No, of course not. I'm sorry. Does anyone follow the Mekillah? No, nobody. No one's Mekel to say a pound doesn't go through a kli. No one in practice does that. Okay, or there's no inconsistency in the poskim, and the shilas don't come up at the same time because the Blios go through the kli differently because they don't come at the same time. On the other one, the second and the fifth. Would be Mekel, and we would say that there is no ChaNaN by a steam system. Okay. Now all of that.
What would be the inconsistency in 3?
Inconsistency. It would be machmer unless there's an inconsistency. Meaning unless it's if Rabbeinu Ephraim be machmer over here and be Mekel over here, then we don't say that. But it's a okay. Now all of that is I can only use the word theoretical. Okay, because all of that is really what the price can talk about saying ChaNaN by Safek issur, but Rebelsky and Sheftabel said, no, it doesn't work like that. He says, over here, it doesn't make sense to be machmer for ChaNaN by a steam system. He says, does it make sense? He says, first of all, ChaNaN b'Sha'ar issurim is itself as a chumrah. Okay, we know ChaNaN Lach by Sha'ar issurim is a chumrah. The Rama, Shachtel loves to tell you, if he tells you at the beginning of Yedias Hata'aroves, that whenever I say it's mutter makom Hefsed merubah means maker, then I'm really maker anyhow. Okay, so really it's Lach it's mutter. He says, and over here also the other thing, which is the tipas hof, does the time go through? We're machmir. The Shulchan says we should be machmir like that time goes through. In our kelim, no one sees any time going through. No one, a million times we've tasted things, no one ever saw time going through. So it's enough to be machmir in a case when it says, the actual case itself, the thing time goes through. But to say ChaNaN in that kind of case also is already, that's too much to say ChaNaN. Okay, so in Lamaisa, that's what people do. They follow this idea that they don't worry about ChaNaN by steam systems. When we get to steam systems in a few times, we'll talk about how that comes out. Okay, but most people follow this, that they come on, and I give you 5 sheets over here and all kinds of things, and red and green boxes, all kinds of things. But they said, come on, to say ChaNaN over here, ChaNaN itself is a chumrah over here, it's ChaNaN b'Lach, and to say that also on a steam system, when no one ever saw any time going through, that's already too much. You don't have to be machmir. Okay. Okay. The layer.
Called also to if you want to taste steam system, right? Have to taste
Yes.
the water. So let's say theoretically become an issur, right? If there's not enough bitul or whatever. So according to this, it's Torah.
If it's a shayla of ChaNaN only. If it's a sometimes yes or not. Yeah.
If you have 1 gallon, it's issur, yeah.
Okay. Fine. Okay, I hear that. Okay. Now, the last thing to talk about is, which also when we get to industrial uses, is like this. ChaNaN says that the thing that we have, the Chatichah, is not Neveilah. So the Yedias Hata'aroves says that's only true. We only say the Chatichah is not Neveilah if the Chatichah was actually not Neveilah, became a Neveilah, meaning there was what we call it a Yedias Hata'aroves. Somebody knew that the thing was made like this, and it became issur. He said, but if nobody finds out about this until the second Bitul happens, meaning until we're at the point where the heter is now in a lot, the issur is in a lot of heter, then there's no ChaNaN. Okay, ChaNaN is no, there's no such ChaNaN in that kind of case. ChaNaN only works if there's Yedias Hata'aroves. Some say it's like, hey merubah. The whole ChaNaN b'Sha'ar issurim is the Rabbanon. So they say it's only when the Chatichah is not Neveilah, it's actually like declared to be a Neveilah. But if that didn't happen, then you don't have to worry about ChaNaN. Okay, now the Ramah, who says this? The Yedias Hata'aroves says this. Okay, in the Ramah Teres Chattas brings it down. Because Ramah Teres Chattas brings this down and says you need to have Yedias Hata'aroves. Okay, the Shach says, the Shach has a lot to say about this. He says, why they're only said in Teres Chattas. He didn't say in Shulchan because he doesn't agree with it. He changed his mind. Okay, he was chayzer from it. He didn't really agree to this. That you need Yedias Hata'aroves. That's why he doesn't say this. Rabbi Krieger says, really? He brings rise in other places where the Ramah seems to say that you need Yedias Hata'aroves, not in Hilchos, not in Tzadi in other places. But then he says maybe didn't mean that. Anyhow, the Prim Gadol leaves it off that it's a Safek. Whether we need Yedias Hata'aroves. Some say the Hefsed you should be samach on this. The Merchus Yaakov says that if it's Lach b'Lach, then you can do it even Chatichah to be makel. If there's no Yedias Hata'aroves, there's a big to do on that one. Okay, do you need to have Yedias Hata'aroves? You don't have to have Yedias Hata'aroves. Okay, which of course is negate to us. Okay, because by us, when ChaNaN type things happen, there's nobody there. There's no yid there who knows what's happening. So Rabelsi said, the fact that we know that the way they make food in the factory is in this way, well, in the case I told you before, and they're making Rice Krispie treats, we know what they do in the factory, okay? We know the pork and beans, we know how they make it, Rabelsi said, that doesn't count the Yedias Hata'aroves. Really? That's what he said. And Rashach said, but the reason would be because Yedias Hata'aroves means is somebody knows what's significant about this. So there are lots of people in the factory who know that they're cooking pork and beans. They're even watching it, being happy now, but to them it doesn't mean anything. He says,
and we know also what they're doing.
And we know also, right, Rabelsi said, we know also, he says, but we don't know about the can. We didn't make the Chatichah into an Neveilah. We just know. So Rashach said, I'm not sure. He said, I'm not really sure that counts. I mean, is it enough that I know that they're making? I mean, think about this. It means is that, every time the Mashiach visits, now we have a day worth of trade. Like, yesterday it was mutter because he didn't come, but today he comes. He's going to visit less often. So Rashach is like this. He said,
RC thinks about
it. We put in cameras. Right? Now we're up the creek. We put in cameras. Right? Okay. So he said like this. He said, Rashach said he's only being willing to be samach on this if do other tzirufim. the other tzirufim, and there was some special reason why it was impossible to kasher these kelim. Like there was some reason why there was very difficult or impossible to kasher. He says, okay, then we could be samach on this. He says, but otherwise he wasn't so thrilled to say this. He was a little bit. He heard of such a thing, such a possibility. Again, remember the idea that you need Yedias Hata'aroves in itself is a machlokes in Lach. Not everyone agrees that you can even be samach on that Yedias Hata'aroves means anything. Okay, but if it does, to say that it means that this specific way of looking at it, that, okay, we know they're making pork and beans. That's what they do. They sent us a schedule at the beginning of the week that says, Tuesday we're making pork and beans from, at this time. So he says, anyhow, he said, okay. He said, in cases where you're really stuck and there's no other choices and there are other tzirufim, then he was willing to say that. Okay, anyhow, so that's it for today. In Mitzvah next time, we're going to talk about exceptions. Today we only talked about what I think were the general rules of ChaNaN. In Mitzvah next time, we'll deal with exceptions.